Some people are born into legendary families. Others, through some alchemy of will, intelligence, and taste, become legends themselves. They don't just inhabit a world of glamour and privilege, they create it, shaping every room, every garment, every moment into a work of art. But what is the private cost of creating such a perfect world? What lies beneath the flawless surface behind the doors of the chateau? Today we are exploring the life of a woman who became an icon of style, not because of the name she was born with, but because of the one she made for herself. She was an American original who became a European Baroness, a shopgirl who became a tastemaker for the entire world. She was a poet, a designer, a visionary who could see the beauty in a weathered stone as clearly as a priceless painting. But behind the impeccable facade was a story of reinvention, profound love, and a quiet, hidden fragility. This is the story of Pauline de Rothschild, the woman who taught the world the meaning of effortless chic and lived a life that was anything but effortless. To understand the world that Pauline Potter stepped into and the one she would eventually conquer, you have to imagine the electric, fast-changing landscape of the early 20th century. She was born in 1908 in Paris, a city that was the undisputed epicenter of art, fashion, and ideas. But her roots were firmly American, planted in the soil of Baltimore, Maryland. This was a city of old, established wealth, a place of quiet manners and rigid social codes. It was a world of inherited status, but it was a world away from the dynastic, almost feudal power of the great European families like the Rothschilds. Pauline grew up in the shadow of the Gilded Age and came of age during the Roaring Twenties. It was an era of explosive creativity and social upheaval. The old rules were being thrown out in art, in music, and in life. Women were bobbing their hair, shortening their skirts, and demanding a voice beyond the domestic sphere. This was the world of Coco Chanel, of F. Scott Fitzgerald, of jazz clubs and Art Deco. It was a time when a person's identity was no longer solely defined by their birth, but could be crafted, curated, and performed. For an intelligent and ambitious young woman like Pauline, with a ravenous appetite for culture and beauty, this was a world brimming with possibility. She was a product of American pragmatism and possibility, but her soul was drawn to the sophisticated, history-steeped aesthetic of Europe. This duality would become the defining feature of her life and her legendary style. Pauline Potter's early life was a masterclass in self-creation. Raised in a respectable but not fabulously wealthy Baltimore family, she learned early on that her greatest assets were her sharp mind, her discerning eye, and an innate sense of what was beautiful. She was not a debutante who simply waited for a suitable marriage. She was restless, creative, and hungry for a bigger life. Her first foray into that bigger world came with her marriage to Charles Carroll Fairfax, a descendant of an old Virginia family. The marriage was short-lived, but it served as her passport into the upper echelons of New York society. When it ended in divorce, Pauline did not retreat into obscurity or seek the shelter of another wealthy husband. Instead, she did something remarkable for a woman of her class in the 1930s. She went to work. She secured a position with the legendary American couturier Hattie Carnegie. And you have to understand, Hattie Carnegie wasn't just a dressmaker. She was an institution, a tiny powerhouse of an immigrant woman who built a fashion empire by bringing the elegance of Parisian style to the great women of America, the Astors, the Vanderbilts, Hollywood royalty. Working for Hattie Carnegie in her opulent Fifth Avenue salon was like getting a doctorate in the art of dressing. It was a world of hushed carpets, discreet service, and the rustle of priceless silks. Pauline wasn't just a glamorous saleswoman. She was at the very heart of the operation, involved in design, in high-stakes buying trips to Paris, and in the delicate art of translating the rarefied world of high fashion for a wealthy, powerful, and often demanding clientele. It was here that she truly honed her eye, developing a signature taste that became her calling card. In an age that often favored flamboyant hats, heavy jewels, and fussy details, Pauline championed a radical simplicity. She understood the power of clean lines, the sensuality of luxurious fabrics, and the quiet authority of an understated elegance. She wasn't selling clothes, she was selling confidence. She was teaching women that true style wasn't about ornamentation, but about the perfect cut, the perfect drape, and the perfect understanding of oneself. This wasn't just a job, it was an apprenticeship in the creation of a persona, an education she would use to craft her own legendary identity. During World War II, while much of Europe was engulfed in darkness, Pauline was living in New York, a city that had become a beacon of creativity and style. With Paris occupied, the fashion world looked to America, and New York was electric, with a mix of homegrown talent and brilliant European artists, writers, and intellectuals who had fled the chaos. Pauline thrived in this environment. She designed a successful line of ready-to-wear dresses for a department store, proving her design philosophy could resonate beyond the bespoke world of couture. She continued to move in a circle of artists and deep thinkers, her apartment becoming a small salon for conversation and ideas. She was building a life entirely on her own terms, a life of aesthetic and intellectual independence. She was already a success, a recognized tastemaker, a woman of substance. And then she met the man who would give her the canvas for her masterpiece. His name was Baron Philippe de Rothschild. He was a poet, a championship race car driver, a passionate vineyard owner, and a member of one of the most powerful banking dynasties in the world. He was a man who seemed to have everything, but he was also a man haunted by immense tragedy. As a prominent French Jew, the Nazi occupation had shattered his world. He had fought against them, been imprisoned by the collaborationist Vichy government for his patriotism, and had made a daring escape to join the Free French forces under General Charles de Gaulle. But the cost of his fight for freedom was unimaginable. While he was away fighting, his estranged wife, Elizabeth, was arrested by the Gestapo. She was sent to the notorious Ravensbrück concentration camp, a place of unspeakable horror designed specifically for women. She was murdered there in 1945, just days before the camp's liberation. When Philippe and Pauline met after the war, they were two people in middle age, both survivors marked by complex, wounded pasts. He was a war hero, carrying an ocean of grief. She was a self-made woman who had carved out her own kingdom of style. Their connection was immediate and profound. It wasn't the fleeting passion of youth, but a deep recognition between two equals. He was utterly captivated by her intellect, her sharp wit, and her serene, almost regal sense of style that was so different from the society women he knew. She was drawn to his charisma, his fierce passion for his vineyard, and his deep-rooted connection to a French culture she had long admired. They married in 1954. It was a union that shocked some, but made perfect sense to those who knew them. In each other, they found a partner for their second act. Pauline Potter, the stylish career woman from Baltimore, became the Baroness de Rothschild, the chatelaine of one of the world's most famous vineyards, Château Mouton Rothschild. The real work of her life, the creation of a world of breathtaking beauty from the ashes of the past, was about to begin. When Pauline arrived at Château Mouton in the heart of Bordeaux's wine country, it was not the palace of exquisite taste the world knows today. It was a grand estate, to be sure, a place steeped in the noble history of winemaking, but it was a working vineyard, and Philippe had run it for years as a bachelor's residence. Imagine rooms with heavy, dark furniture, the scent of old wood, leather, and the faint, sweet smell of the cellars clinging to the air. It was functional, deeply masculine, and somewhat neglected, a place of business, not a home for the soul. For Pauline, this was not a challenge. It was a blank slate, and with it, she would create an entire universe. The transformation of Mouton became the supreme expression of her artistic genius. Her approach to decorating was nothing short of revolutionary. In an era when good taste, particularly in the Grand Chateau of France, meant rigid adherence to historical periods, a formal Louis XV salon here, a somber Napoleonic library there, Pauline threw the rulebook out the window. She treated rooms not as museum exhibits, but as living, breathing collages. She fearlessly mixed the priceless with the provincial, the grand with the simple. In one room, a magnificent 18th century tapestry might hang above a simple, almost rustic wooden bench. Priceless blue and white Chinese porcelain, a Rothschild family passion, could be found sitting next to a collection of seashells or a piece of weathered driftwood she'd found on a walk along the coast. She brought nature indoors, filling baskets with pine cones and moss, turning a gnarled branch into a piece of sculpture. Her philosophy was about creating an atmosphere, not just an acquisition list. She wanted rooms that felt lived in, layered with history, personality, and stories. She wanted comfort, intrigue, and a place for the eye to rest and the mind to wander. Her longtime friend and frequent guest, the celebrated photographer and designer Cecil Beaton, captured her method perfectly. He wrote, "She has the courage to place a great Gobelin tapestry in a bathroom or to hang a looking glass from the ceiling over a bed. Her effects are often startling, but always beautiful." He understood that her choices, however eccentric they seemed, were guided by an unerring artistic instinct. Her bedroom was legendary, a masterpiece of her unique vision. The walls were covered in deep blue toile de Jouy, a classic French country fabric. But in a stroke of genius, she had the fabric walls glazed with a high sheen, reflecting the light and giving the traditional pattern a startling modern edge. It was a perfect metaphor for her style, rooted in history but vibrantly alive in the present. The bed was a simple brass affair, and on her nightstand, instead of a priceless antique, might be a stack of books, a simple glass of wildflowers from the garden, and perhaps a curious, beautiful stone. She created a style that was both opulent and deeply, intimately personal, a reflection of her own complex character. But this wasn't just about making things pretty. It was a deeply emotional and intellectual exercise. For Pauline, a house was a form of autobiography. Every object had a story, a reason for being. One of the most touching and rarely discussed aspects of her life at Mouton was her creation of intimate, almost secret spaces within the Grand Chateau. She designed a small, secluded library for Philippe, a man she knew needed quiet reflection after the unimaginable traumas of the war. She filled it with his favorite books, comfortable, deep chairs, and objects that spoke to his passions: poetry, vintage cars, and of course wine. It was a sanctuary built from love and empathy, a physical manifestation of her care for him. Her own private pain was often hidden behind this curated perfection. Pauline suffered from poor health for much of her life. She was physically frail, often unwell, and plagued by ailments, a fact that stood in stark contrast to the powerful, confident, and flawless image she projected to the world. The immense obsessive energy she poured into her homes was perhaps a way of controlling her environment, of imposing a sense of beauty and perfect order on a world that often felt chaotic and on a body that often failed her. For a woman whose own physical vessel could be a source of pain and limitation, creating these harmonious, flawless rooms was an act of defiance. It was a way to build a beautiful, strong fortress against the vulnerabilities of life. Her life at Mouton was a triumph of the will, a daily act of creating beauty not just for the world to see, but as a vital, necessary balm for her own soul. Pauline de Rothschild was not a figure of political controversy, but her life and her work do invite a more subtle cultural debate. The central question revolves around the very nature of the persona she so meticulously crafted. Was the famous Rothschild style an authentic expression of self, or was it the ultimate performance of a lifetime? The term often used to describe her is effortless chic. But the reality is that her brand of effortlessness required colossal effort. It demanded a rigorous intellect, an encyclopedic knowledge of art and history, and an ironclad self-discipline. Every detail, from the placement of a candlestick to the knot of her scarf, was the result of a conscious, educated choice. This wasn't the casual, thrown-together look of someone who didn't care. It was the hyper-curated look of someone who cared immensely. The debate, then, is about authenticity. In a world that increasingly values the raw and the real, Pauline represents a kind of high artifice, a belief that one's life can and should be edited and perfected like a poem. Of course, it's impossible to discuss this life without acknowledging the immense, almost unimaginable privilege that made it possible. The Rothschild name and fortune gave her a platform and resources that are beyond the reach of almost everyone. Critics might see her life's work as the ultimate elitist fantasy, a woman with infinite money playing house on a grand scale. And there is a truth to that. Her world was hermetically sealed, a bubble of exquisite taste far removed from the struggles of ordinary life. However, to dismiss her as just another rich woman with a hobby is to miss the point of her contribution. Unlike many who inherit great wealth, Pauline was not a passive consumer of luxury. She was an active creator. She had a professional eye honed during her years with Hattie Carnegie. She was a published writer with a poet's sensitivity to language and mood. A rarely seen quote from one of her essays reveals the depth of her thinking. "Style," she wrote, "is what one is, not what one has. It is a sense of what is appropriate. It is not a question of money, but a question of character." This was her defense. She believed deeply that taste was not something you could buy, but something you had to cultivate within yourself. The controversy, if you can call it that, is whether a life of such curated perfection can be seen as an artistic achievement or simply a monument to privilege. Perhaps the truth is that it was both. She was an artist whose medium was her own life, and her canvas was one of the most exclusive in the world. Pauline de Rothschild's influence on the worlds of fashion and design is so profound that it's almost invisible now, simply because her ideas have become the standard. The Mouton style she pioneered, the fearless mixing of high and low, of antique and modern, of the refined and the rustic, is now the dominant aesthetic in high-end interior design. Every time you see a decorator place a simple earthenware pot in a sleek minimalist room or hang a piece of abstract art in a traditional home, you are seeing the ghost of Pauline's vision. She liberated design from the stuffy confines of period rooms and made it personal, eclectic, and alive. She also played a crucial role, alongside her husband, in cementing the identity of a great wine estate as a center for art and culture. Philippe had the brilliant idea in 1945 to have a different contemporary artist design the label for each new vintage of Mouton Rothschild. But it was Pauline who created the physical environment where this fusion of wine and art felt natural and inevitable. The grand parties she hosted at the chateau were not just social events. They were gatherings of the world's most creative people, artists, writers, musicians, and designers. She and Philippe built a museum of wine in art on the estate, further solidifying Mouton as a place where the pleasures of the palate and the pleasures of the eye were inextricably linked. This concept has since been emulated by wineries all over the world, but perhaps her most significant legacy was how she redefined what it meant to be a woman of society. She was on every best-dressed list, photographed by every major photographer, but she was never just a socialite. She was a woman of substance, a writer, a thinker, a creator. She proved that style was not a frivolous pursuit, but a serious form of self-expression. She imbued a life of leisure with intellectual rigor and artistic purpose. Her life, so dedicated to creating beauty and order, ended with a sudden, tragic finality. In 1976, her beloved husband Philippe suffered a severe illness. Pauline nursed him devotedly, but the strain took its toll on her own fragile health. Shortly after he began to recover, she suffered a massive heart attack and died. It was as if her life's work was complete, her partner safe, and her own weary body could finally let go. Her death marked the end of an era, a final poignant chapter in a life lived as a deliberate work of art. In the end, what is the takeaway from a life of such curated perfection? Pauline de Rothschild was an alchemist. She took the raw materials of her life, an American upbringing, a sharp mind, a difficult past, and later a great fortune, and spun them into a world of breathtaking beauty. Her life was her art form, and her homes were her masterpieces. She reminds us that style is not just about the clothes you wear or the furniture you own. It is a language, a way of telling the world who you are, what you value, and what you find beautiful. For Pauline, it was a way to create a sanctuary of harmony and elegance in a world that had shown her and her husband its capacity for chaos and brutality. Her flawless interiors and impeccable fashion were a kind of armor, a shield of beauty against the sorrows of life. Her story is a quiet but powerful testament to the idea that we can be the authors of our own lives. She was not born a baroness, but she became the very definition of one, on her own terms. She leaves behind a legacy not of power or politics, but of something more lasting, a vision of how to live with grace, intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to beauty. Pauline de Rothschild created a perfect world, and in doing so, she left our own world a little more beautiful than she found it.